Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. This is certainly an unplanned video. Um, Honestly, I was busy with with the family earlier, and so I was sort of watching the markets, but I was also kind of busy, so I was not able to do a live stream or anything like that. And it seems like some of the stuff we've talked about has now played out. So I want to talk about some of that stuff. Um, there's quite a bit to talk about actually. And I feel like the first thing we kind of need to do is go through and just have like a damage report on like what actually happened today. Um and because I was looking and I was looking at Bitcoin and Bitcoin had a drop, which is fine. I mean, it kind of expected to have natural volatility with Bitcoin, but um like some of the prices on some of the altcoins, I mean, they got absolutely annihilated, right? Like absolutely annihilated. We saw altcoins down like 50% or something. I mean, it was just like I couldn't even believe it. Like I was looking at Bitcoin dominance and it was at 59, and then it was at 60, and then it was at 61, and then like the next minute it was at 62, and then it was at 63. And it just kept going higher. And what was crazy, I mean, it shows you just how thin liquidity is in the altcoin market. Because Bitcoin, at the end of the day, I mean, Bitcoin, how much did it drop yesterday? Technically, it's. I mean, from daily open to daily close, Bitcoin only dropped 7%. Right? It actually found support at the 20-week moving average. Let me go ahead and share my screen before you guys yell at me, because I feel like I'll be with how much, with just how crazy things are. I feel like I'll go the whole stream and forget to even show my screen, and I'll just be talking to no one. But yeah, you can see that Bitcoin on the daily here, I mean, it found support essentially at its 20-week moving average. And like I was looking at other parts of the market, obviously, right? I mean, you guys know I've been talking about Ethereum going to the 20-week SMA, the 21-week EMA for a long time. And a lot of people, faded that call. And here we are, right? Like it went down there. And um look, I told you guys. Like I told you guys what my outlook was. I could be wrong, right? And every step of the way, I will admit I could be wrong about my next prediction, right? Like I could be. I don't know. I mean, when Ethereum went home, I said I was going to go to all-time highs. When it went to all-time highs, I said, "All right, expect a 30% drop." And it always seems crazy. But guess what? Guess how much Ethereum dropped? Anyone care to guess how much Ethereum dropped from the high to the low? A 30% drop, right? So like I have on one hand I have people saying like, well, it's because of what Trump said about the tariffs. It's a black swan. Guys, there's always some BS narrative that you can assign to anything. Trump has been talking about tariffs nonstop, like all year long, and there's been plenty of times he's talked about tariffs and the market didn't react at all, right? Because the market doesn't care. A lot of this is, people trying to find a reason to justify certain things. But you could argue for something like Ethereum, you could argue that it was always going to drop 30%, right? It was always going to go back to its bull market support band. Why? Because that's what it always does in the post-halving year, in September, October timeframe. That's what it always does, is it drops down there. And even in 2020, right? You got that 30% drop. Even in 2021, you got the 30% drop. 2017, right? I mean, you can see it. It's what always happens. And so, I mean, it's certainly infuriating to me when like we talk about it, people say it's wrong, and then it ends up happening, and then when it happens, we're like, well, you got lucky. Does anyone remember what the narrative in 2017 was that caused that sell-off? No one cares. No one knows, no one cares, right? Does anyone remember what it was in 2020 that caused it? You even remember in 2021? No one knows. No one cares. In a few years, no one's ever going to look back at this drop and be like, "Oh, it was caused because Trump tweeted out something about tariffs." No one's going to care, and no one's going to assign that narrative to it. The only narrative is just going to be the same narrative, the same damn narrative we've had, and that's that Ethereum, after the rally, into August, local top in August, what normally happens it drops to the bull market support band. Sometimes it happens in September. Sometimes it goes down there in early October. In 2017, it was still at the 20-week SMA, even in early November, right? So this is just what happens in the market. Bitcoin had a kind of a scary drop, right? Had a scary drop. And look, guys, I've said for a long time, Q4 is not the time to be complacent. It's not. I fully expect, and I will say this again, from the high in Q4, whatever the high ends up being, to the low in 2026, Bitcoin will likely drop 70%. Okay? That's what I think. I could be wrong, but that's what I think. I don't know exactly when the high is going to come. Obviously, we have to at least talk about the uncomfortable outcome of what if the high is already in, right? There's always a chance that that's the case. But what I would argue, my argument here is that because the sort of all these indicators that people have spent forever creating, that none of them have really triggered any of the peak indicator stuff. That doesn't mean they will, right? There's a chance that they won't. There's absolutely a chance that they won't. But I think, right? Like I think that so long, and I'll say I've said it for a year, right? I've said it for probably at least a year. Until we get 2 weekly closes below the 50-week moving average, then we cannot make that declaration, right? We cannot make that declaration. And sure, like we can look at the ROI from the low, right? Like the scariest chart right now to look at for Bitcoin is the ROI from the low, because when you measure it from the low, it's possible the cycle's over, right? Absolutely possible. But there's other ways you can measure it which are not like as scary. Okay? If you measure it, say, peak to peak, you look peak to peak, there's still a chance. I mean, you could argue 2 cycles ago lasted 1,473 days, and we're currently at day 1,433, right? So there's a chance that it might mimic that. In terms of structurally, what does this cycle look like the most? It looks like the 2017 cycle, right? I mean, look at it. It looks really similar. Go to days since Bitcoin has had a 50% drop. It looks like the 2016, 2017 cycle, right? Where there was very low volatility for like the entire cycle. And then all of a sudden at the end of it, we got a 50% drop at the end of the bull market, or at the end of the bull market, 50% drop. And then we went sideways for 2018 and we got another 50% drop at the end of it. So structurally, it still looks like the 2017 cycle. For me, I have a plan on how I'm navigating this. Now, I don't know how you're navigating it, and you need to have your own plan. But what I've said is that what makes the most amount of sense throughout this entire cycle, except I made one exception in April of 2025. All cycle, what have I said? I have said Bitcoin is the better hold. Why? Because it gives you exposure to the upside, but it also minimizes your downside risk. Altcoins are the opposite during Bitcoin dominance uptrends, right? What do altcoins give you? They minimize your upside and they maximize your downside risk. That's just the way it is. And you don't take it up with me, take it up with the data. Because after all this time, we're now what, 4 years in now? After all this time, altcoins today put in a new low against Bitcoin for this cycle today. So every single person, every single guru on YouTube and Twitter who told me I was blowing smoke and how I was missing alt season, every single one of them was wrong. Because as of October 10th, 2025, altcoins went to a new low A new cycle low on their Bitcoin pairs. So when you look at the collective altcoin market, I'm not talking about your altcoin, get off my back. When you look at the collective altcoin market, there was not a single time this entire cycle where it made sense to call for alt season. Not a single time. Not one. I just did a video we released earlier today, and I was talking to you guys about how, like, every single one of these moves, this is total 2 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin. Every single one of these moves, everyone keeps calling alt season, right? This was the Solana alt season in 2024. And then in late 2024, it was the meme coin super cycle alt season. Think about those gurus who got you convinced it was a meme coin super cycle, all while they're just bleeding out to Bitcoin. And then recently we had the ETH and BNB alt season, right? This is alt season, right? Like in 2017, that's alt season. In 2021, that was alt season. No, anything experienced this cycle has not been alt season. So again, it does feel somewhat, I mean, I feel somewhat justified for all the Bitcoin dominance videos, right? It feels like there's some level of justification there that, you know, everyone gave me such a hard time about just saying stick with Bitcoin. And here we are. Now, I made one exception back in April, right? I did. What did I say? The only exception I've made publicly was Ethereum. And the reason I made the exception in April for Ethereum is because it went home, right? It's because it went home. And so at that point, I had no, like, I couldn't be bearish on the ETH Bitcoin valuation anymore. And the reason I couldn't be bearish on it was because if you look at every time in history, right, every time in history that ETH Bitcoin bottoms in its cycle, it's always when Ethereum goes home. So I know it felt like I was crazy calling for Ethereum to go home, but look, when it went home, ETH was able to bottom against Bitcoin for this cycle. For this cycle. And so I went from just wearing my Bitcoin maxi hat, which is a pretty nice hat, if we're being honest. You know, people throw the Bitcoin maxi, that's sort of the toxic Bitcoin maxi stuff around. But the sobering truth, the sobering reality for everyone in crypto is that being a Bitcoin maxi is not a bad thing. You know, it's not. Just sticking with the king is a great way to just to go, right? It is. And so what? Right? So what if some people are Bitcoin maxis? So what? Right? I mean, for basically the entire cycle, my crypto portfolio was just only Bitcoin, you know? And I heard like, oh well, you know, you're missing all these altcoin gains, but like what altcoin gains? They're putting in new lows today. What have I really missed out on? So I did make an exception, right? I mean, I feel like deep down we're all kind of Bitcoin maxis at heart at this point in the cycle, but I did make an exception, and I said in April, I think having some ETH can make sense now because I think ETH is bottoming against Bitcoin. And then what I said was that Ethereum should go to new all-time highs. It was a bold call when it was sitting at $1,400. You know, everyone was dunking on Ethereum, saying it was dead, blah, 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 right? Same old stuff. And it went to all-time highs. But then what did we say? We said it's going to get rejected on the first attempt. It's going to sweep the high, and it's going to go back down to the bull market support band. Now, listen, to me, this is what I wanted to see. I don't need to see anything else for Ethereum to be convinced that it can't go to another all-time high now. I think it's possible. Now, again, I will warn you. At some point, I've had a pretty good run for the last year or so. But at some point, I'm going to get something wrong. And I don't know if we're now reached that point. There's a chance that we have, right? Let me give you an example. For example, if the top for Ethereum is already in, then it was always going to go to the bull market support band, right? So to some degree, there could be confirmation bias, like, oh, it went there, now it must go to all-time highs, right? That's what I think. But maybe I'm wrong. Like maybe the top's already in, And perhaps this is where I take the loss, because I did accumulate. I did, quote unquote, buy the dip today. I mean, obviously, I was more interested in Ethereum at $1,300 and $1,400. Down here and even right here, it's not as attractive to me, to be completely honest, at 3,500. But I mean, so what? I mean, still, if it goes to new all-time highs from here, it still could be a decent return in the short term. I've mostly focused recently on commodities, and and having those positions in the last like year or so, instead of in altcoins and whatnot. And we've seen palladium do well, we've seen gold, we've seen silver, we've seen uranium. Like, all these things are doing really, really well. And I sit here on like a day like today, I'm like, gosh, like all these commodities I keep talking about keep doing well, and altcoins are on 50%. There's always a bull market somewhere, even if it's not where you want it to be, right? You can make money if you're willing to step out of your comfort zone and be invested in things that aren't shiny little altcoins that have a cute little dog associated with them. So what I think is going to happen, right? What I think is going, I could absolutely be wrong. What I think is going to happen for Ethereum, and I don't know about your altcoin, unfortunately, but what I think is going to happen for Ethereum is, I think it'll rally to a new all-time high. That's what I think. All right. Now, I have to have an invalidation point, because if this is where I go down for the cycle, right? If this is it, I need to cut my losses before we're like way back down here. Like, I'm not interested in riding Ethereum from 3,500, back down to 1,500. Okay. I'm not interested in that. In fact, that might happen next year. That would be my base case, is that next year we get a big crash in crypto. But that starts this year. It could start this year, and it might already started. Maybe it has, but I need an invalidation point. And so, for me, what is the invalidation? What is it? Well, for Ethereum, I would really like to not see it close down here. One weekly close below the 20-week SMA could be okay, but I would not want to see more than one. And the reason why is because we're so far along in this cycle, we just don't have time to deal with any of that. We don't have time. It's already Q4, right? If Ethereum is going to go to new all-time high, it's got to be in the next 2 to 3 months. Otherwise, that's it, right? That's all she wrote, and we'll see you next cycle. We'll play chess next year, and we'll get really good at that, and we'll repeat this whole thing in 2027 or whatever. But there's got to be an invalidation. For me, Ethereum, the Ethereum chart is not the invalidation I'm looking at. So, like, I don't want to see Ethereum get a weekly close below the 20-week moving average, but that's not even the invalidation I'm looking at. The invalidation that I'll be looking at to figure out and say, hey, I'm wrong, right? And I've been right about a lot recently. So I know it's coming. I know I'm going to be wrong about something soon. I keep saying that. I don't know what it's going to be. Is Bitcoin. All right. What have we always said for the last 4 years? Bitcoin leads the bull market, right? What do we know about Bitcoin's 50-week moving average? Every single time in history that it's gotten the weekly close, a couple of weekly closes below its 50-week moving average, either in the post-halving year or the early part of the midterm year, every single time, that was confirmation that the top was in. It doesn't matter if you like it or if I like it. That's what it always was. When the close below the 50-week SMA occurred, the top was in. And we were in a bear market at that point. I believe Bitcoin will have a bear market. I don't know if it's going to be October 2025 to October 2026, or November to November, or December to December. I don't know. It's going to be one of those, probably. If you made me guess, I would say 40% chance October, 20% chance November, 40% chance December. 40, 20, 40. So there's a decent chance it happens this month. If you want to go ROI based off the low, if you want to go ROI based off the peak, or just look structurally or look at the peak indicators, December's just as likely as October. The reason why I don't think November, although I suppose it could be November, is that, I mean, normally Bitcoin likes to do something different each cycle. Like last cycle, it topped in November. The cycle before that, it was December. The cycle before that was like November again. I just don't think it's going to repeat exactly what it did last cycle, because last cycle was a little bit different than the cycle before. Like last cycle, everyone was sitting here thinking like, oh, maybe it'll go up into December, or even go up into 2022, and it didn't. It topped in November, and in 2017 it was in December. So maybe it tops in October. Maybe it goes until December. What would I look for to provide confirmation? Weekly closes below the 50-week moving average, right? Where is the 50-week moving average? 101K. All right. So just so you guys know, and so we're on the same page, you got to know I'm going to get something wrong at some point. I hope Ethereum going to all-time highs is not one of them. I hope Ethereum does go to all-time highs now. But I have to have, I mean, when we're talking to how many people are watching, 10,000, 9,000 people, make sure you guys like the video if you guys are here. I feel like I at least deserve that. But you guys have to know, I have to have a contingency plan. I don't want, I don't want anyone just holding stuff as it drops back down like 57, 70, 80% or something. My get out of Dodge, I mean, like is that 50-week SMA. Weekly closes below that, I'm gone. I'm out of here. I'm out of the Cryptoverse for, probably at least 6 months. Okay. So that's my number. I would be out of everything, right? I mean, maybe I'd still hold some Bitcoin, maybe like 20, 30% or something, but I'd be out. I'd be out of Ethereum. I'd be out of, out of everything at that in crypto if we get weekly closes below that, because it's always meant the bear market is underway. So when I look at Ethereum, I feel like it did exactly what I wanted it to do. I think it's going to go rally now to all-time highs, even though it sounds absurd. It also sounded absurd to say it was going to drop 30%, and then it did. I think it's going to go to all-time highs now. If I'm wrong, I will come out here and admit it. If Bitcoin gets weekly closes below the 50-week moving average, I will admit it as quickly as I can. I'm not going to hide, right? I will admit it as quickly as I can. That's what I would look for. But in the meantime, I think Ethereum, I mean, it's going to take a little bit of time to repair things. But I think there's a reasonable chance here that we end up building out support in this area and getting one final rally into the market cycle top. One final rally for all the glory. So we'll see if it happens. We'll see if this is where my streak comes to an end or not. But this is what I think is going to happen. Now, if we do a damage report, I honestly, I did not know how bad it was until like a couple of hours ago when I looked at some of these altcoins. Guys, some of this stuff doesn't even make sense. I mean, like it just look at some of these. Link dropped to $8. $8. Litecoin, the poor thing, $72. You guys, we should have known this liquidation was coming because Litecoin was pumping yesterday. Whenever Litecoin rallies, it always signals something bad is happening. Look at the Litecoin Bitcoin valuation. I mean, look at this wick on Binance. Like it went all the way down to 500 sats, basically. Solana. Look, Solana, like I haven't, I mean, to be completely honest, like I haven't said a lot of things about Solana, but I will say this. It held its own today. Like given the extent of the sell-off, it didn't drop nearly as much as you would think. Because the issue is that some of these other altcoins, like look at Avalanche. Look at this wick. It went down to $8. I mean, did it put in a new low? It went down to 876. It is not a new low. Not a new cycle low. But think about that. Like, I mean, think about that. Was there ever a great time to be a long-term holder on Avalanche this cycle? No, because it just keeps on dropping against Bitcoin. And if you look at its Bitcoin valuation, I don't want to look at it. I mean, look at this. You keep going. XRP dropped to $1. I mean, that's a massive drop. $1. Uniswap, $2. Uniswap today put in a new cycle low. A new cycle low. Now let's think for a minute here. We have altcoins today that dropped 70% or so over this week. 70%. Bitcoin dropped 9%. I told you guys that a 10% drop by Bitcoin could lead to a 30 to 40 to 50% drop by alts. I was wrong. I was wrong. It led to 70% drops in some of them. I overestimated the amount of liquidity they had. I overestimated it. Cardano dropped to 28 cents. You know, I used to say all the time that ADA was going to 400 sats. And I told you guys altcoins are oscillators at best. It went to 260 sats. 260. Matic, new cycle low, all the way down to 14 cents. Doge, not a new low, but it went down to 9 cents. So, absolute carnage in the crypto markets today. Absolute carnage. And look, I mean, there's going to be people spooked because when you look at the ROI of Bitcoin from the low, you can't ignore it, right? I mean, we can't just sit here and pretend like it's not happening. Like, there's a chance that is it. And if we get weekly closes below the 50-week moving average, you just got to move on. Move on with the I mean, I'm gonna move on with my life, and we'll talk more. we'll talk about it, and we'll see you guys next year. But if there is anything left in this cycle, if you want to take the more optimistic approach, right, it's going to happen soon. Because I'm convinced. I mean, I think next year will be a bear market, and the top should be sometime this year for Bitcoin. That's what I think. So make sure you guys give the video. Make sure you guys give the video a thumbs up if you haven't yet. And I'll look at some of the comments here in a little bit. But one of the interesting things is ETH Bitcoin. Do you guys remember where I said that ETH Bitcoin was going to drop to? I said it was going to drop to its 20-week moving average, right? You guys remember that? Look at this. Right to the 20-week moving average. Right there is where the wick was. Now, there is a chance it goes below it. It did go below it back over here a little bit. Like, it's not like it's impossible for it to drop below it. Even in like late 2017, we got like a drop below the bull mark swap. So like, it's not impossible for it to go below it, but the easy trade already happened, right? Because if you wanted to, because what I did was I skimmed some profits when Ethereum went to 4,900. I told you guys that, right? I told you guys skim profits now, and then you can put it back in when it drop after it tags 21-week EMA. Well, ta-da, here we are. But if you traded your ETH back to Bitcoin up here, we said that after Ethereum sweeps an all-time high on its USD pair, ETH Bitcoin is going to fall back to its bull mark swap band. That's now happened. Now, I think that ETH has bottomed against Bitcoin for this cycle. And so I'm looking for a macro higher low on this pullback for Ethereum. I'm looking for a macro higher low. It could already be in. It's possible it could go a little bit lower. Like it could go all the way down to like 0.03, maybe even 0.029 in kind of like a worst case scenario or something. But ultimately, I think Ethereum will get another move against Bitcoin before the cycle's over. That is at least my base case right now. What was really hard to articulate, but I feel like I did a pretty damn good job of it, is I said, you guys remember I literally said this was going to happen, that ETH Bitcoin would put in higher lows And then on each of these higher lows, altcoins would put in lower lows. And that's exactly what's happening. ETH is putting in higher lows on its Bitcoin pair, and alts are putting in lower lows. Right? It's the same thing. This is what we said was going to happen. Lower lows for the collective altcoin market against Bitcoin, while ETH Bitcoin puts in higher lows. So when people keep asking me, like, is Bitcoin dominance going to go to a new high? I was always like, well, it depends on how low ETH goes against Bitcoin. Because even though altcoins put in a new low against Bitcoin today, Bitcoin dominance did not go to a new cycle high, at least not yet. And the reason for that is because ETH Bitcoin is not at new cycle lows. And I don't think Ethereum is going to go to new lows against Bitcoin this cycle. Maybe it will next year. I don't think it's going to happen this year. So like, it's so hard to know the nuance of like, will Bitcoin dominance go to a new all-time high for this cycle if ETH has already bottomed against Bitcoin? It's possible, but it depends on where ETH ends up bottoming against Bitcoin. If it bottoms at 0.033, then it's unlikely. If it bottoms at 0.03 and we got another flush coming for all Bitcoin pairs, then it's entirely possible Bitcoin dominance sweeps the prior high, kind of like it did last cycle, right? And, I just made a video about Bitcoin dominance today. And I said, look, guys, in October of 2020 and October of 2017, Bitcoin dominance ended the month at 64%. October 2017, October 2020. So it's like, all right, well, October 2025. And sure enough, we just went all the way up there. 63.5%. Not quite 64. Doesn't mean we won't hit 64. It's been a stressful cycle, honestly. I mean, it really has. It's been a stressful cycle because, like, I feel like everyone wants everything to be more complicated, but, like, the right answer this entire cycle has just been stick with Bitcoin. I mean, maybe pick up something here or there, but, like, dominance is going to go higher. Alts are going to bleed against Bitcoin. I think to some degree, the entire asset class is going through this, like, this maturity process where, like, everyone wants to be like a penny stock investor because they think that's the way to get rich. And it turns out just holding the blue chips was the way to get rich. Who knew? But it is interesting. And the other thing that we talked about was how the S&P 500 should get a 5% drop. Either late September, early October. Now it's down 2.5% already. I think the S&P 500 is going to go to the bull market support band. So watch for that to happen in the coming weeks. I think you're going to see that play out. By the way, when you look at the S&P divided by M2, it's getting the correction exactly when it got it in 1999. Same time frame. Look at this. I know you guys aren't going to believe me, so I'll show you. Take if you look from the low here, October, the low, to the first, like this, to this 5% correction right here that we're at right now. That top occurred about, I guess we wicked a little bit of it a little bit later, but about 29 weeks. About 29 weeks after the low. What's really interesting is that in 1999, 1998, the low was in October, and then that local high was in April. Now it's reversed. The local low was in April, and now the local high is in October. But if you take if you look at the date range on here from April 7th to where we are now, about 26 weeks. Like, it's basically the same time frame in terms of the wick high, and maybe it's going to play out like it did back over there, where it got a big drop, right? Like, it gets a drop and then it goes right back up and then comes back down. But I do think that you're going to see the S&P 500 tag that 20-week moving average. And it's possible, if this whole thing is playing out like it did back then, it's possible we're just in this massive distribution phase that's going to take a while, And what's really interesting about it is when you look at a bar pattern on this from 1996, it lines up exactly. And I'm not of the opinion it's going to forever, but look at that. I mean, it's like the same thing. I mean, like these 20% drops even happened at the same time, and so just be aware that as we get closer, to the end of the cycle and whatnot, there's just the narratives are going to be flip-flopping constantly. And you can see back then how many times the narratives probably flip-flopped before we finally got the crash that took us down. Who knows how long it's going to take? But I will reiterate, until Bitcoin gets weekly closes below the 50-week moving average, there's still a chance it goes higher. But when you get below this, I think it's time to cut and run for the hills. We're not below that yet. Hopefully Ethereum can hold. Hopefully it can go to new all-time highs. There's some other things we gotta talk about. I wonder what Bitcoin dominance excluding stables did. Okay, it went all the way back up to 67%. All right. Interesting chart. Total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin. It hit 0.29. 0.29. All right. Now, I know what you're thinking. Is that good enough? Well, I don't know. Maybe. But what I will say is that right now, as we sit here today, the week of October 10th, alt Bitcoin pairs are at 0.37. And the week of October 9th, 2017, alt Bitcoin pairs were also at 0.37. They bottomed in early November of 2017. That's when they bottomed. Is that going to happen again? I don't know for sure, but it's something you have to think about. Now, I've told you guys for a long time that my base case was 0.25 for all Bitcoin pairs. And we just went to 0.29. Now, the issue at this point is that while I think Bitcoin dominance should stay strong throughout this month, this is one of those things where, like, it might be prudent to flip the bias in about 3 weeks, regardless of where it is. And one of the reasons I say that is because if you add in USDC to this calculation, guess what? It hit 0.25 today. So with that in mind, I'm not sure it makes sense to be overly deterministic at this point about it, right? It hit 0.25 when you account for both USDT and USDC. But I'll tell you this. There's still no guarantee that it can't go lower. And the reasoning for that is because, technically speaking, and as we can all agree, being technically correct is in fact the best way to be correct. Technically speaking, last cycle, it actually went to 0.18. It did not bottom at 0.25. And so one of the things that's kind of always kept me bearish on alt Bitcoin pairs was the fundamental understanding that altcoins are oscillators at best, not worst, at best. So I was always thinking, well, they'll come back down here eventually, because even if I should be including more stablecoins and whatnot, even if you could argue that this is the low when you compare it, this is the same as this when you can, use more stablecoins. Even with that understanding in mind, there's always this like little voice in my head that will always continue to say, how can you ignore the lower highs and lower lows, right? I think that's the reason why I've kind of always kept that bias on alt Bitcoin pairs. Is like I've always known that like maybe if I include more stablecoins, and we've talked about it, and I've said before, right? Like it doesn't matter until we're closer to the end of the cycle. Now we're getting closer. Maybe we should include more stablecoins. But one of the other reasons why it was always easy to stay bearish on all Bitcoin pairs was because I'm like, well, you have, like, technically speaking, you have a high and a lower high and a low and a lower low. So I'm over here thinking like, all right, well, you look at this chart and like why, bottoming at 0.25 was always like, that was the optimistic view. That was the optimistic view. And what's really interesting about this parallel channel, I mean, I roughly drew it, but you could argue that this capitulation wick right here is to the halfway point, is to the midpoint of the channel. You can see that in 2020, that's where we got rejected for a little bit. So I think what makes the most amount of sense is, surprise, to stay bullish on dominance for now. And I don't know exactly how high it's going to go. And in the short term, I wouldn't be surprised to see it kind of bounce around a little bit while people figure out what the hell's going with their altcoins. But I think it makes sense to stay bullish on Bitcoin dominance for at least the next 3 weeks. And in 3 weeks' time, I'll look and see what's going on, and maybe I will have a different view at that time. But I've always said it's better to know which way the wind is blowing to try to predict exactly where it's going to stop. And I don't know exactly where it's going to stop in terms of how high Bitcoin dominance will go, but I do think we're still blowing in the Bitcoin dominance direction for now. One of the things to remember, and I've always said this and I'll keep saying it, Bitcoin leads the bull market. If the cycle is over, then Bitcoin's going to be heading down to the 50-week moving average soon and getting weekly closes down there, and that'll be confirmation that the cycle is over. If the cycle is not over, then Bitcoin will not get a weekly close below the 50-week moving average, and it will probably be one of the first things to hit a new all-time high. If Bitcoin can't hit new all-time highs from here, what the hell chance do any of the altcoins have? At least most of them. They don't have much of a chance. So, in all these prior moves by Bitcoin, when you look at sort of these range highs that are set, one of the things to keep in mind is that Bitcoin dominance was able to rally up until the point where Bitcoin broke through the highs. Right? And you'll see that after Bitcoin broke through the highs, that's where Bitcoin dominance got these larger corrections. And even over here, Bitcoin broke through, and then Bitcoin dominance got this massive correction. So, because Bitcoin is around $14,000 away from an all-time high, if it were to move back up to that price, then then dominance should go up, right? It should go up. If it doesn't go up there and the cycle's over, dominance should still go up, as you saw today. So again, Bitcoin still gives you exposure to the upside and minimizes your downside risk. On weekly closes below the 50-week SMA, I'd cut your losses and just get out. Or hopefully you still have profits. I mean, I imagine most people's cost basis is not above 100K. I would say below 100K, we're in trouble for Bitcoin. If we go below 100K on weekly closes, as long as we're above that, there's still chances, right? There's still chances in the market, and especially for Ethereum. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of altcoins. I don't know. I mean, it's tough to imagine that some altcoins are gonna ever see. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of major alts that will never see all-time highs again. I mean, that's a difficult topic for a conversation, but it's just kind of the reality of the situation. We'll see what happens. I would expect some type of further correction in the S&P 500 next week to get it back down to the 20-week SMA. I mean, maybe it'll take it a couple weeks. I don't know, but it seems like a reasonable view to have. Those are my thoughts, guys. I mean, that's essentially the damage report. It's tough. Like when we sit up here and we say, all right, 30% correction's coming, it's easy to sit there and know that it makes sense. And then when you're down here, it's like, well, crap, like, what if that's it? Like, hopefully it's not, but I'll tell you what, guys, if it's not over, if Ethereum does have another rally left in it, then I gotta say, I mean, I feel like we'll look back at this moment and be like, wow, like, that was crazy. I don't know. What does this look like on a lot? Yeah, I guess it is on a log scale. I hope we get one more move by Ethereum. I do think I mean with the capitulation today, the how thin the order books are, it kind of provides some potential confirmation of the butterfly harmonic view, the butterfly effect. If you guys haven't seen the butterfly effect videos I put out, go watch those because I'm kind of leaning in that direction at this point. I mean, there's not the liquidity is spread pretty thin, and whenever the more sustained sell off comes, which I think is coming in 2026, like it's hard to imagine you don't get some deeper correction. But in the meantime, maybe we can find support here. If you look at it, it's very similar to this move in June, right? You had a weekly close, right here above the 20-week SMA, but you had a wick down. What if this is the same thing? Weekly close and a wick down. So you get your first move, your second move, and then you get your third and final move to end the market cycle. So let's see if it plays out. Um, Someone says Ethan make the move soon. I agree. It'll be the last high of the year. Yeah, I think if we can get one more move, that'll be it. That'll be it for the cycle. It's been a long cycle. I think a lot of us just want the cycle to be over. Completely honest. Make sure you guys give the video a thumbs up, guys. We have 12,000 people watching. I don't know. That might be a new record. We got 12,000 people watching and only 3.3 thousand likes. So what that means is that the like to viewer ratio is at 0.25. What a coincidence. Someone says the cycle's been underwhelming. Yeah. I mean, if you've been in Bitcoin, it's been okay. What's your final target for ETH? So I did a video on that. Just go watch it. It's called Ethereum, a realistic price prediction or something. Like I released it a few months ago. ETH 21 week. Yeah, it's there. You can check that off the box. Why does the cycle have to end this year? I mean, nothing has to happen, but it's just that's when they normally end, and I don't make the rules, I just enforce them. Q4 2013, Q4 2017, Q4 2021, Q4 2025, right? Like, I mean, that's just, it seems to make the most amount of sense. Why not? Can I show the extension from the 20-week moving average for Bitcoin? Yeah. Here's the log, the natural log of the price over the 20-week moving average. Short-term bubble risk. Yeah, I mean, it's barely above it. It's still above it, though. Gosh, what's crazy is it's midnight and we got like 12,000 people watching. There's too many comments. I can't. How long have we've been going 49 minutes. I don't know. You guys got anything else? I mean, I hate to just leave with 12,000 people watching, but I got other things to do. Yeah, it's just mostly people asking about all season. I think I mean, let's see where the weekly closes come in, at least. What's crazy is silver hit $50. I know this stuff is like voodoo for some people, and like is like, oh, I don't want to touch precious metals, but weeks like today or weeks like this week are certainly reasons. We even talked about palladium getting a nice move off these lows. Now it's at like it just went all the way to $1,500. But I digress. All right, guys. We do have ITC Premium. You guys can check that out if you want, but I mean, we're kind of late cycle at this point. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard. I mean, I see a lot of people in the comments saying they lost a lot of money today. I mean, I think if you lost a lot of money today, just remember we've all been there. Like, there's not a single person, not a single guru on Twitter or YouTube that hasn't been in that same position. I lost a lot of money on altcoins and in prior cycles. Um, I would say just like learn the lessons, move on. Don't beat yourself up too much. It's not going to do anything. Um, and all you really can ever do is make the next best decision, right? Rather than worry too much about what happened in the past. And unfortunately, with sort of these like Bitcoin dominant stuff and the altcoin reckoning stuff we talked about, I mean, like as much as I wish that people would have just like listened, like I always knew that people would have to learn the hard way for a lot of this stuff, right? Like because I had to learn the hard way. I mean, like I watched alts bleed against Bitcoin this entire way. I started buying altcoins in the last cycle, kind of like around this point, and then I just watched them continue to bleed out against Bitcoin for a really long time. And I'm like, gosh, I should have just bought Bitcoin and not alts. Um, and then eventually they rallied, but the issue is that I basically required an alt season just to break even on some of them when you look at their Satoshi valuation. Just something to think about. Mistakes were made, right? Uh, but it's not something you can't learn from for the next cycle. All right, guys. Make sure you guys subscribe if you're not. Maybe you guys will get an alt season whenever I hit 1 million subscribers. Maybe that's what. Maybe that's what we're. Maybe that's what it's waiting on. Um. Someone else, has there ever been a drop in like this in Q4? Let's see, Q4 2017. I mean, I think the thing is like Bitcoin hit the bull market support band here in I guess it was September 2017. In 2021, it was added in like late September, maybe early October. I think we'll have to see if this ends up holding or not. Like if we end up closing down here, then I think you could argue this is not what's happened in prior cycles, you know? Um, if we close up here, then, it's possible to just kind of overlook it and just say we had one more test, right? All right, guys. I think I'm going to wrap it up. I thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, and again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. See you guys next time. Bye.